John Felt here, and this is the Mershman Seed Weekly Weather Briefing, May 31st, 2019. I know there's very much an intense interest in when is this wet weather going to end. We really need some dry and warm weather to dry out fields. I have some relatively positive news, but I wouldn't call it totally positive, and it's also somewhat guarded as far as looking down the road in the future. So let's get started and talk about the current weather situation. 3, 2, 1. Well, across the middle U.S. over the last week, you can see Oklahoma, southeast Kansas, parts of Nebraska and Missouri received a soaking rain. This rain here came with some severe storms, a very heavy rain, as much as purple as 10 inches of rain, and that drains right here into the Mississippi, so that pushed even higher the flood crest coming down the Mississippi below this band of very heavy rainfall. But in Kansas, you can see we also had 2 to 5 inches of rain over the southeast part of the state. Nebraska, fairly widespread 2-inch. So this is really not the type of rain that we want to see going forward over this area. And I think there's going to be some shift, and it's going to be positive news for some, and for others in the Corn Belt, it's not going to be so positive. So right now we do have relatively moist air over most of the area, dew points from the 50s to the 60s or even to the 70s. We still have a bit of a boundary here. Now, nothing is quite as sharp as it was last week. Thus, I don't expect the widespread severe weather outbreaks we saw last week into this week. Now, having said that, tomorrow night, Saturday night, there is an enhanced risk over some areas, but overall, it looks like less tornado activity over this week. I also wanted to mention here the southeast U.S., how hot the southeast U.S. has been. While the middle part of the nation's been relatively temperatures held in check with all the rain, the southeast has been unusually hot with record temperatures in many areas and very, very dry. This area in red is 10 to 12 degrees above normal for the week, so very hot weather over the southeast U.S. So we have a lot of stress on crops. We have stress from wet weather. We have stress from hot and dry weather. So it's been a tough start to the growing season. So we have many rivers in flood across the middle U.S., black being above flood stage, blue being very high. We have very wet soils, blue being most likely areas where soils are wet. We can't get much field work done. And these are estimates from models, so it varies a bit. Now, take a look at the southeast. Look how dry soils are over the southeast. So we have a pretty large area of anomaly from this whole area pretty much here that we're struggling with wet soils. And then in this area here, we're struggling with dry soils, so quite a bit. But the primary Corn Belt, Kansas, generally on the wet side, Nebraska, Iowa, northern Missouri, good part of South Dakota, all this area, southern Minnesota and Wisconsin sort of could use some dry weather. Bit of positive news here wherever we can find it. Soil temperatures, they've been bumping into that dome of cool air, but they've worked up a little bit warmer here. We have 50s and 60s now moving into the upper Midwest. But the big story here is the major flood, and in many cases this is the second greatest flood since 93. And a little tidbit here, I don't know if I've mentioned it in the past, but I was in charge of the Des Moines, Iowa Forecast Office in 1993, and I remember very well the extent of that flooding. And in many cases, this is the second highest since 93, very close, and in few cases, it's actually the record. So when you get flood crest coming down here, it is really extending out into the floodplain and having a big impact on agriculture due to inundation of fields. And the other thing is, I put this out this past week, not only is the magnitude of this flooding so significant, it's also the duration of the flooding. It's just been going on and on and on. So a lot to talk about, a lot to look at. Now, there are other river systems. Missouri has also been very active with major flooding. The Arkansas has been active, and that's feeding into the lower Mississippi. And pretty much the entire Mississippi is active. So a lot of areas here. I know there's a very fertile cropland in this middle Mississippi region. most of the flooding's been to the north and to the south, but that's been hit by flooding as well. So almost anywhere you look, we have some inundation. Now the eastern Corn Belt, if you're in that area, that has not been as bad as the central Corn Belt. Okay, so let's get into the forecast here. If we look at the jet stream, some big differences from last week. We definitely don't have that strong southwest flow that we saw last week. Remember, we had this flow coming in very strong. We had wind shear. We had a lot of energy. It's much more compact. We don't have as much energy. So the precipitation we get is going to be more localized than we saw last week. And we look at the jet stream here. We basically are going to, as we get to day 14, the middle of June, looks like we're sort of going to a west to east flow with sort of almost a ridge of high pressure down in this area. So I see a hint of a southwest flow, but again, I think this is going to be primarily impacting a part of the country that's a little bit more localized, and unfortunately it's Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, maybe Nebraska, parts of Missouri. That seems to be the area. And here's your temperature outlook as we go through the next 14 days, blue being cooler than normal temperatures and brown, orange being warm. So it looks like the real heat in the southeast U.S. gradually works its way back closer to normal as we go through week 1 and especially week 2. Okay, well, here's the graphic I'm hesitant to show because it's not good news. Now, I want to say, I know there's lots of interest up here in the upper Midwest on when's it going to dry out. And I've said this for the last 3 or 4 days. I've been saying we will get more rain, but this is definitely less rain than we've seen in the past. So this should be taken as a positive. It should be a positive also for the rivers that I don't see right now a whole lot of really heavy widespread rain that is again working in this area. In 93, that's what we saw as we went through the summertime over and over again. Now the question is whether that'll kick back in that pattern. I don't see it right now, but we need to be very vigilant because the vulnerability with high stream flow is going to be here for a while. But Oklahoma, Arkansas, parts of Missouri, not necessarily the growing areas, and fairly significant part of Kansas, but especially the southeast part, that looks like where the heavier rain will be. East Corn Belt, there's also some heavier rain, but I think it's more typical heavier rain for this time of year. So overall, less rain across Iowa, Nebraska, and the upper Midwest. Some rain, but less. Again, look at these rivers. I wanted to point out here, this is the Missouri River Basin on this side, Mississippi on this side. And what I wanted to show you here is that as we get into this upper Mississippi, look at that, not nearly as much rain. This is only up to an inch or so, so that's good news. We look over the Missouri, most of the Missouri, not as much rain. That's good news. Arkansas, that's not good news. This is going to trigger another crest on the Arkansas. So I do think once we crest on the Mississippi, we are going to go into a recession that's going to be prolonged. It's going to go for a while. Hopefully we've seen the highest flow, but we need to be vigilant, likewise on the lower Missouri. Okay, here's your extended. You can take a look for your area. It looks like maybe June 6th or 7th is some of the heaviest rain in this area. Again, over the upper Midwest, this light green saying above normal, but it does not look like a strong signal for above normal rain. Now, I do want to point out tomorrow, Saturday, I do want to point out the enhanced risk of severe, and I do want to point out this is the 6th and 7th, the heavy rain in this region. Okay, let me summarize this because I want to be clear. Major flooding going down, a number of rivers, very wet fields, but the heaviest rain looks like it's going to stay outside the majority of the primary Corn Belt. Unfortunately, that Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, southeast Kansas corridor looks like it could remain quite active this week with chance of rain most days and into early next as well. Once again, if you have any questions, specific questions I haven't answered, you can always contact me, John, John, at bluewateroutlook.com. Be glad to help you any way I can. Take care.